Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm making this video. It's another more personal one. I've made a few videos of my father, my interviews with him, and then some with my perspective on my father. And I thought I would make one about my mother. And my earliest memories of my mom, my relationship with my mom is different from the one with my dad. I was always very close to my dad from the beginning. I was not always close with my mom. My earliest memories of my mom were in Tijuana. There was a time when she wasn't there, and my sister Sylvia took care of it. Excuse me, I got something in my throat. Potato chips. Um, and my sister Sylvia took care of us for a good while. But my earliest memories are of my mom with us in Tijuana. And the earliest memories, of course, when we were all much younger. Sylvia was maybe 13 years old at the time. Um, my mom was maybe in her early 30s, right around that time. And, she was different than my father. She had a different personality. Um, Raising children, and at the time, there were five of us. Later, there were seven. And my mom was more, she um, wasn't always very patient with us. And a lot of us, the kids, um, always gravitated towards my father. My father would come home, and he was always very caring. He was always very loving, and my mom wasn't, and that just wasn't her personality. Um, they had eventually seven children, and my mom didn't always have the patience for the seven kids, and she had a different attitude and a different way of being with her children, which wasn't always very good. I mean, sometimes, I remember one time my sister said that my mom was depressed or she was sad, and she tried to hug her. My sister tried to hug her, and my mom pushed her away. That wasn't her way of being, and she didn't feel comfortable with that. And I remember that um, my mom sometimes wouldn't be patient with us, and she was the disciplinarian. She would spank us, and back then, the shoe, the belt, that was her. And so none of us, I don't think, with the exception of maybe my brother John, who was the baby, none of us were ever very close to her, and none of us saw her with the same admiration that we saw my father. Now, having said that, once I left the house, my relationship with my mom was very different. Once I left the house, I would see her, and she would always, hug me and kiss me, and she was affectionate, and we would have different conversations. I kind of remember one time when I had just moved out, and I was home, and I wasn't feeling well, and my mom called to see how I was doing. She found out that I was sick, and she had my dad bring her to my apartment, and she brought me some soup. You know, I also remember that my mom, even though, like I said, that we didn't have this closeness, but every morning she was up early making us breakfast, and she was also up early making us lunch for school, which I didn't always appreciate. Now that I'm making my own breakfast and my own lunch, sometimes I appreciate it. She did it for, at the time, we were seven of us, and then my dad, she would make it breakfast for all of us. She also made dinner, and the dinners were great. I was a finicky eater, so I didn't appreciate what a good cook she was. But she was. She did it all the time. Now, maybe she wasn't able to connect, you know, and a lot of it I know was her upbringing. My grandmother wasn't very sweet or compassionate. She was also kind of a disciplinarian, and she was also she wasn't very patient. And it wasn't until much later that my grandmother came to visit us, and her attitude changed. It was different. She was much more affectionate towards us. She spent more time with us, and we were also adults. I think that both my mom and my grandmother were more patient with fellow grown-ups. Little children, um, maybe sometimes very precocious children, um, just were they just couldn't connect with them, and they didn't want to connect with them. And but later, no, it was different. And a while back, someone told me um, to write a letter to my mom and to tell her how much I appreciated her. And so I did. I wrote a letter to my mom, and I put it in the mailbox. And that Sunday, I think I went to visit them after church, and my mom just came up to me and she gave me a huge hug. And like I said, my relationship with my mom, once I was out of the house, was very different. We would talk about different things. She would tell me different stories. She would tell me things about my father. She would tell me things about herself and her childhood. And she would tell me things about her family. And it was very interesting. I didn't realize that my grandfather, her dad, was a communist. He supported Fidel Castro. He was the shop steward at the plant where he worked. And once the plant was closed, he was kind of like, what's the word? Um, he was blacklisted, and he couldn't get a job because he had been the union organizer. Um, I think that somewhere in our past, I'm related to David Alfaro Siqueiros, the famous artist. He may be like a great uncle or something. He was, I think, more contemporary of my grandfather, maybe a little bit older, but and my earliest memories are also of always when we would travel to Mexico, going to my mom's side of the family to their house to stay, my grandmother's house, and then all the cousins would come and see us. My mom was one of like 14 kids or something, like a lot of kids, a lot of kids. And, I can imagine my grandmother not having the patience for, all these kids. And my mom had seven. And I think that her personality she picked up from my grandmother. So she wasn't always the most patient. And sometimes there were some things my mom said and she did that weren't very nice. They weren't, she wasn't a very she wasn't that we didn't like I said, I didn't see her the same as my dad. My dad was, I consider him one of the holiest people I know. And my mom wasn't that way. But, I have to understand, and I do understand that her background and how she grew up. And, and I used to sometimes say, because I know how much my father loved her, that in some ways, my mom made my dad the man that he eventually became when he was a father. Now, my dad was already a really good guy, but you know, his love for her, um, was really is really extraordinary, and she influenced him a great deal. And he did things to take care of his wife, and that was very important to him. You know, and so that influence, was an influence on my father, and it made him a different person than he otherwise may have been. Um, Better, I think. And but now, years later, my parents are both in their 90s. My mom's 93, my father's 98, and up until somewhat recently, last couple of years, my mom's health has deteriorated, and she was diagnosed with, I'm not sure if it's Alzheimer's or dementia. I think it's Alzheimer's. And when I talk to her, and you'll see this in the video, she does answer me, and she does know who I am. So I don't think that the dementia or Alzheimer's um, has paralyzed her. I mean, I know people that have had dementia and Alzheimer's, and my wife's grandfather, And we would go to see him, and he looks at you and he has no idea who you are. And then sometimes, at first though, he would look at you and he'd recognize you, and then you'd walk out of the room or you'd stand up and come around the side of him, and it's like he saw you for the first time again. He would forget the short-term memory. He would forget about you. But my mom doesn't behave that way. My mom, I'll talk to her, and she knows exactly who I am. Every single time I've gone to see her, she knows exactly who I am. Her health has deteriorated in other ways. She has a hard time walking, and she has a hard time standing up. And so a few weeks back, um, she stopped going to church. And so now I go to her house and see them. I can't take them out. I used to at some point take them out. I can't take them out any longer. I would have to take my dad by himself, and I know that he would rather go out with my mom. So, you know, um, in the end, my mom, like I said, she's 93 years old, and the relationship um, since I've moved out of the house has been a very good one. My mom has been very sweet, very compassionate, very kind. Um, she's been a very good mom to me since I moved out of the house. um, like I said, at the time when we were living there, it was not the same. Um, but since then, and then I've been out of the house now for what is it, 35 years? 35 years. So the last 35, 36 years have been very, very good. And I plan to send her another letter. And my dad, I've already finished my dad's letter. I'm going to send her another letter. Um, and I recommend, if you're watching this and if you have older parents or even not so older parents, but write them and tell them how grateful you are. And a good friend of mine, Jesse Easter, said that he recommended it, he did it. And he said, because you don't want to lose your parents and then you wish you would have told them something. And so I plan to send them both their letters and and tell them how much I appreciate them and how much I love them. And my father stresses how important peace is, and we both have discussed this. And I want them to have peace. My dad told me not long ago that he wishes that he had been more affectionate with us. And I told him, "Oh, Dad, you were plenty affectionate. That's not even in question. We have no complaints about my dad." I had wished growing up as a little boy that my mom had been more affectionate, but that just wasn't the way that it was. I I personally don't feel that this has affected me into adulthood. Um, I suspect that it did affect my sisters into adulthood. They didn't have the same relationship with my father that I did. I was, young, the first male, and so I was always tagging along with my dad. I was out of the house I think I was like 7, 8 years old when I started going with my dad to his shop on weekends, um, spending more time with him. So anyway, I'm going to play the clip of my mom. Um, it's not a good clip. She's struggling to. I ask her some questions, and she struggles to answer me. I wish I had taken video earlier of her, but this is what I have right now. If I do more later, I'll put those. I'll post those as well. So anyway, thank you for watching. I will, please leave a subscribe and leave a comment and give me a thumbs up. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. ¿Te sientes? Bien. Y me cuentas que no fuiste a misa hoy, pero que tienes tu rosario aquí y puedes rezarlo. ¿Estás cansada, mamá? ¿Y no quieres salir? ¿No quieres salir a dar la vuelta? ¿Mamá?
No, ¿Quieres salir en la tarde?
¿En la tarde?
Sí,
A ver si te sacamos en esos días de Navidad para salir de la casa, ¿verdad?
pues sí.